You boys lost. The voice slid out of the darkness before the men did, slow and amused, like someone already certain of how this would end. And Marcus Reed felt the air change before he even saw them, a shift in temperature and tone that made the narrow alley feel tighter than it was, barely 12 feet across with brick walls rising 3 stories high on either side, trapping the smell of damp concrete and old rain. The distant hum of traffic fading behind them as 10 silhouettes stepped forward under a flickering streetlight that buzzed like a dying insect, their shadows stretching long across the cracked pavement until the exit behind Marcus and Malik disappeared completely. And Malik slowed beside his brother, not stopping, not yet, just enough for their shoulders to align the way they always did when something felt wrong, their footsteps quiet against gravel, their hoodies dark and simple, nothing about them flashy or confrontational. Just 2 men walking home after a long shift that had stretched nearly 14 hours, the weight of fatigue resting behind their eyes but never dulling their awareness. And Marcus glanced briefly to the left where a chain-link fence rattled softly in the night breeze, then to the right where stacked crates leaned against the wall, narrowing the space even more, and the men spread out casually, not rushing, not shouting, just forming a slow semicircle like they had all the time in the world. And the one in front stepped closer, tall, clean jacket, confident posture, the kind of confidence built on numbers and assumption, and he smiled without warmth. "This isn't exactly a shortcut most people take," he said, and Malik exhaled slowly, the faint cloud of breath visible in the cool air, his hands loose at his sides, his expression calm, not challenging, not submissive, just steady, and Marcus tilted his head slightly, listening to the quiet details. The faint scrape of a shoe behind them, the rustle of fabric, the soft metallic clink from somewhere in the group, and above them the streetlight flickered again, dimming the alley before brightening in a pale yellow glow that made everything feel suspended, and a car passed at the far end of the block but didn't slow, its headlights sliding briefly across the brick walls before vanishing, leaving the alley sealed in shadow again, and one of the men chuckled, low and dismissive. "You two picked the wrong street tonight," he said, and Marcus felt Malik shift slightly closer, not in fear, but in quiet alignment. The same instinct they'd shared since childhood, silent communication without words, and Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm, even. "We're just heading home," he said, and the leader nodded slowly as if considering that, then glanced over his shoulder at the others, and a few of them spread further, blocking the last open gap near the fence. Casual but deliberate, and somewhere above, a loose metal sign tapped softly against brick in the breeze, rhythmic and hollow, and Marcus noticed the faint reflection of the streetlight on Malik's watch, the second hand moving steadily, counting the silence, and for a moment, no one moved, the alley holding its breath, the distance between them no more than 8 feet now, and Marcus could feel the tension settle like pressure before a storm, not loud, not explosive, just heavy and waiting, and the leader stepped forward one more pace, his shoes crunching lightly on gravel, his smile fading into something colder, and Malik lifted his chin slightly, meeting his gaze without hostility, without fear, just quiet steadiness, and the flickering light above buzzed again, washing the alley in pale gold as the circle tightened, and the night seemed to fold inward around them. Marcus did not step back, and he did not step forward either. He simply stood where he was, shoulders relaxed, breathing slow, the kind of stillness that came from long nights and longer training, and beside him Malik shifted his weight slightly onto his back foot, his hands still loose at his sides, his posture calm but deliberate, and the men in front of them seemed to notice that quiet composure, the absence of nervous movement, the lack of hurried glances, and it created a small ripple of uncertainty that moved through the group like a breeze through dry leaves, subtle but real, and the leader tilted his head, studying them more carefully now, as if expecting something else, some sign of panic that never came, and Marcus glanced briefly toward the end of the alley again, calculating distance without appearing to, roughly 30 feet to the street, uneven pavement, stacked crates on the right, chain link fence to the left, and above them the flickering streetlight hummed again, buzzing softly as the glow dimmed for half a second before returning, and Malik quietly rolled his shoulders once, the fatigue from the long shift still lingering in his muscles, 14 hours that had started before sunrise, coffee from a paper cup at 5:30 in the morning, a call that stretched past noon, paperwork that filled the late afternoon, and now the cool night air settling against his skin, and Marcus remembered the quiet ride back. The city lights sliding past the windshield, Malik leaning his head briefly against the glass, neither of them saying much, because they never needed to fill silence. And now the silence returned, heavier, filled with the sound of shoes shifting against gravel and the distant rumble of a train somewhere across town. And one of the men behind them cleared his throat, not aggressively, just uncertain, and another glanced down the alley as if checking whether anyone else might appear. But the street beyond remained empty, the storefronts closed, neon signs dark. And Marcus finally spoke again, his voice calm, measured. "We are not looking for trouble," he said, and Malik nodded faintly beside him, his gaze steady, not locked on any one person but moving slowly across the group, taking in faces, movements, posture, and the leader gave a short laugh, though it sounded less confident now. "Funny," he said, "because you look pretty comfortable for someone surrounded." And Marcus met his eyes without challenge, without hostility, just quiet certainty, and Malik glanced briefly at his brother, a small movement, almost imperceptible, and Marcus understood it immediately, the same silent communication they had shared since they were kids walking home from school, the same awareness they had carried through years of training and experience, and somewhere above them a loose cable tapped softly against brick again. And the cool air moved through the alley carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier that evening, and the leader stepped closer, now. Only 6 feet away, close enough for Marcus to see the reflection of the streetlight in his eyes, and Malik remained still, his breathing steady, the calm between them beginning to shift the tone of the moment, not through force, not through threat, but through something quieter, something grounded, and for the first time the men seemed less like a wall and more like individuals, each one glancing subtly at the others, reading the same unexpected stillness, and Marcus felt the night stretch around them, the seconds lengthening, the flickering light buzzing overhead, and the quiet tension building not from movement, but from the absence of it, as if the alley itself were waiting for something to change. The leader shifted his stance slightly, the confidence still in his posture but now edged with curiosity, as if the quiet composure in front of him did not match the outcome he had expected, and he glanced briefly at the others behind him, subtle, almost instinctive, the way people do when they expect reassurance from numbers, and one of the men folded his arms while another adjusted his jacket, their movements small but revealing, and Marcus noticed the change immediately, the shift from dominance to evaluation, and beside him Malik exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the alley again, not hurried, not tense, just methodical, the way he had done countless times before in unfamiliar spaces, and the cool night air brushed against the back of Marcus's neck as a faint breeze slipped between the brick walls, carrying the distant sound of tires rolling across wet pavement somewhere beyond the block, and the leader spoke again, this time slower. "You two seem pretty calm," he said, and Marcus gave a faint nod, not defensive, not confrontational, just acknowledging the observation, and Malik tilted his head slightly, watching the group spread out a little more, not tightening, but adjusting, like people unsure whether to push forward or step back, and above them the flickering light dimmed again, casting the alley into a muted glow that softened edges and stretched shadows longer along the ground. And Marcus remembered the first time he and Malik had learned to read silence. Like this, years earlier during late-night patrols, when the absence of sound often said more than any words, and Malik shifted his feet slightly, gravel crunching softly beneath his shoes, and the small sound echoed more loudly than expected in the narrow space, drawing attention back to the stillness, and one of the men behind them glanced toward the street entrance again, as if suddenly aware of how quiet the block had become, and the leader stepped half a pace closer, stopping just outside, arm's length, his expression narrowing, studying Marcus more closely now, and Marcus met his gaze calmly, shoulders still relaxed, his hands visible at his sides, and Malik mirrored that posture without even thinking, their movements naturally synchronized, and the leader gave a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Most people start talking faster when they are nervous," he said, and Marcus replied quietly, "We are not most people," and the words hung in the air, not aggressive, not challenging, just matter of fact. And Malik glanced briefly toward the sky where the faint glow of city lights reflected off low clouds, the temperature hovering somewhere in the low 50s, the air cool but steady, and the leader seemed to consider that response, his shoulders shifting slightly, as if recalibrating the moment. And behind him one of the men adjusted his stance again, hands in pockets, eyes moving between Marcus and Malik, and the subtle uncertainty spread further, the group no longer moving as one. And Marcus felt the tension evolve, no longer sharp, but layered, like the quiet before something unseen shifts, and the loose metal sign above tapped again against brick, steady and rhythmic, and Malik glanced once at Marcus, a silent check, and Marcus gave the smallest nod, the understanding between them immediate, and the alley remained still, the flickering light buzzing overhead as the quiet balance of the moment continued to tilt. The leader's eyes narrowed slightly as Marcus's calm response settled into the silence, and for a moment the alley felt even narrower, as if the brick walls had leaned inward to listen, and Malik shifted his weight just enough to angle himself half a step closer to his brother, not defensive, not confrontational, just instinctive, and the faint hum of the flickering light above them grew louder in the stillness, a low electric buzz that filled the space between breaths, and somewhere at the far end of the block a car door closed, the sound distant but clear, echoing softly before fading again, and the leader glanced briefly toward the sound, then back to Marcus, his confidence still present, but now mixed with something quieter, something more measured, and he took another slow step forward, stopping just a few feet away, close enough to study their faces under the uneven light, and Marcus remained still, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing steady, while Malik let his gaze drift slowly across the group again, noticing how two of the men had shifted closer to the wall. How? Another looked down briefly before glancing back up, the cohesion of the group beginning to loosen at the edges, and the leader spoke again, his voice softer now. "You two always walk this way?" he asked, and Marcus answered calmly. "Only when the night is quiet." And Malik gave a faint nod beside him, the cool air brushing past them as a breeze slipped through the narrow gap overhead, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked asphalt. And one of the men behind them adjusted his stance, the scrape of his shoe against gravel sounding louder than expected, drawing attention back to the circle, and the leader followed the sound with his eyes before returning his focus to Marcus. And for a brief moment the tension shifted again, no longer about numbers, but about presence, about who controlled the quiet space between words, and Malik glanced toward the crates stacked against the wall, their edges casting long shadows across the pavement, then toward the chain-link fence where a loose wire rattled faintly, and the subtle sounds layered into the silence like quiet signals, and Marcus lifted his chin slightly, not as a challenge but as acknowledgement, and the leader studied that movement carefully, his expression tightening just enough to show that the calm in front of him did not fit the script he had expected, and behind him one of the men exhaled slowly, the sound almost imperceptible but enough to break the stillness for a second, and the flickering light dimmed again, then brightened, casting shifting patterns across their faces, and Malik's watch caught the glow for a moment, the second hand continuing its steady motion, marking time in a space that seemed suspended, and the leader shifted his shoulders, as if deciding whether to press further or ease back, and Marcus quietly said, "It is late," his voice even and unhurried. "Everyone should be heading home," and the words landed gently but firmly, not a command, not a warning, just a calm suggestion, and the leader held his gaze for another second, and the silence stretched once more, the alley holding its breath as the balance of the moment continued to shift, subtle and quiet, like the slow turning of a tide. The silence after Marcus spoke settled heavier than before, and for a moment no one answered, the faint buzz of the streetlight filling the space like a quiet pulse, and the leader studied Marcus carefully, his eyes narrowing just slightly as if weighing whether the calm suggestion carried more meaning than the words themselves. And behind him one of the men shifted his feet again, gravel crunching softly, the sound echoing against the brick walls, and another glance toward the alley entrance, as if suddenly aware of how exposed the group looked under the dim yellow light. And Malik noticed the subtle changes immediately, the slight repositioning, the quiet glances, the uncertainty spreading through the group like a slow ripple, and he breathed in slowly, the cool night air settling in his chest, steadying, familiar, and Marcus remained still beside him, his posture relaxed but grounded, the kind of presence that did not demand space yet seemed to occupy it fully, and the leader finally gave a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "You are pretty confident for someone outnumbered," he said, and Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering the statement, and Malik glanced briefly toward the stacked crates again, then toward the chain-link fence, his awareness mapping the space without urgency, and Marcus answered quietly, "Confidence does not always come from numbers," and the words hung in the air, calm and measured, and the leader's smile faded just a fraction, and behind him one of the men folded his arms while another rubbed the back of his neck, their movements small but revealing, and the flickering light above dimmed again, then brightened, casting shifting shadows that stretched across the pavement, and somewhere in the distance a faint siren sounded far away, barely audible, blending into the hum of the city, and Malik noticed the sound immediately, though he did not react, and Marcus heard it too, his expression unchanged, and the leader seemed to notice the quiet steadiness between them, the absence of hurried movement or nervous energy, and he stepped half a pace closer. Again, stopping just outside comfortable distance, studying Marcus and Malik more closely, and Malik met his gaze calmly, not challenging, not yielding, just present, and the leader exhaled slowly, the confidence in his posture now mixed with hesitation, and one of the men behind him shifted again, glancing toward the street as if considering stepping away, and the cohesion of the group loosened further, their positions no longer perfectly aligned, and Marcus sensed the balance tilting, the moment stretching, and he quietly added, "It is late, and this block is quieter than it looks," his voice even, almost conversational, and Malik gave the smallest nod beside him, and the leader held Marcus's gaze for another second, the silence deepening again, the alley holding its breath as the faint distant siren grew, just slightly louder, still far away, but enough to change the air, and the flickering light buzzed overhead, and the tension shifted once more, no longer built on numbers, but on uncertainty, quiet and growing, like the slow turning of something unseen. The faint siren in the distance grew slightly clearer, still far enough to blend into the night, but close enough to shift the rhythm of the alley, and Marcus noticed how two of the men turned their heads almost at the same time, subtle, instinctive, as if the sound had reached them before they realized it, and Malik remained still beside his brother, his breathing steady, his shoulders relaxed. Yet his awareness sharpened in the quiet way that came from long nights spent reading situations that changed without warning, and the flickering light above buzzed again, casting a brief shadow across their faces before brightening, and the leader seemed to notice the change in his group, the slight hesitation, the glances toward the alley entrance, and he straightened slightly as if trying to reassert the moment, but the stillness in front of him remained unchanged, and Marcus quietly shifted his gaze from one face to another, not challenging, not confrontational, just observant, and the cool air brushed past them again, carrying the faint scent of rain and distant asphalt. And somewhere down the block a car rolled slowly through an intersection, tires humming softly against damp pavement, the sound fading just as quickly as it came, and Malik glanced briefly at Marcus, a small movement that spoke without words, and Marcus gave the faintest nod, their silent communication steady and familiar, and the leader exhaled slowly, the confidence in his stance now softened by uncertainty, and one of the men behind him took a small step back, barely noticeable, yet enough to shift the shape of the circle, and another adjusted his jacket, glancing once more toward the street, and the cohesion that had formed earlier loosened further, the group no longer moving as a single presence. And Marcus spoke again, his voice calm and even. "It sounds like the night is changing," he said quietly, and the leader glanced toward the distant siren again, then back to Marcus, his expression tightening slightly as if trying to read more into the calm tone, and Malik shifted his weight slowly, gravel crunching softly beneath his shoes, the small sound echoing against the brick walls, and the alley felt suspended between moments, the flickering light buzzing overhead, the distant siren growing just a little louder, and Marcus lifted his chin slightly, not as a challenge, but as acknowledgement of the shifting atmosphere, and the leader held his gaze for another second, the silence stretching once more, and the faint breeze moved through the narrow space, rattling the loose wire along the chain-link fence, the sound light but persistent, and Malik's watch caught the glow of the streetlight again, the second hand moving steadily, counting the quiet, and the men behind the leader exchanged brief glances, their posture less certain now, and the balance of the moment tilted further, no longer built on numbers, but on hesitation, and the alley remained still, waiting, as the distant siren edged closer and the quiet tension softened into something more uncertain, like the calm before an unseen shift. The distant siren continued to grow, still soft but no longer easy to ignore, and Marcus noticed the subtle change ripple through the group again. Two of the men turning their heads toward the alley entrance, while another shifted his stance, as if reconsidering how long they wanted to remain there. And Malik remained calm beside his brother, his posture unchanged, his breathing steady, yet his awareness sharpened further, and the flickering streetlight buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow that caught the edge of Marcus's jacket as he slowly reached toward the inside pocket, his movement deliberate and unhurried, not sudden, not threatening, just controlled, and the leader immediately noticed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You reaching for something?" he asked, his voice quieter now, and Marcus paused halfway, his hand still visible, his tone calm and even. "Just making sure everyone stays comfortable," he said. And Malik remained still, his gaze steady, the quiet confidence between them unchanged, and the leader watched carefully as Marcus slowly withdrew his hand, revealing a small leather wallet, dark and worn at the edges, and he held it low, not raised, not displayed dramatically, just present, and the flickering light caught the faint metallic glint inside as Marcus opened it slightly, and the leader leaned forward just enough to see, his expression shifting in a subtle but unmistakable way, and one of the men behind him frowned, trying to understand, while another leaned sideways for a clearer view, and Marcus's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "It has been a long shift," he said quietly, and Malik mirrored the movement, reaching slowly toward his own jacket, his motion equally deliberate, equally calm, and the leader's posture tightened, the uncertainty now visible in the set of his shoulders, and Malik withdrew a similar leather case, holding it low at his side, the faint reflection of the streetlight catching the metal inside, and the silence deepened instantly, the alley suddenly feeling larger as the tension shifted from uncertainty to realization. And one of the men behind the leader took a small step backward, gravel crunching softly, while another lowered his gaze briefly before looking back up, and the distant siren grew slightly louder, still blocks away but now unmistakable, and Marcus closed the wallet gently and slipped it back into his jacket, his movements slow and controlled, and Malik did the same, the quiet synchronization between them steady as ever, and the leader exhaled slowly. The confidence that had filled the alley earlier now replaced by something more cautious, and Marcus spoke softly. "It is late," he repeated, his tone calm. "Everyone should head home." And the words carried differently now, no longer just a suggestion, but a quiet conclusion, and the men exchanged glances, their formation loosening further, the certainty gone, replaced by hesitation, and the flickering streetlight buzzed again overhead as the distant siren continued its slow approach, and the alley, once tense with expectation, settled into a quiet shift, the balance finally turning without a single raised voice. The shift was immediate but quiet, like air leaving a sealed room, and Marcus noticed the way the leader's shoulders lowered just slightly, the certainty replaced by careful thought, while behind him one of the men cleared his throat and stepped half a pace backward, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes, and another glance toward the alley entrance again as the distant siren grew clearer, its low rising tone echoing faintly between the brick walls, and Malik remained still beside his brother, his posture relaxed, his gaze calm, and the flickering streetlight buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow that softened the sharp edges of the moment, and the leader exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool night air, and he gave a faint nod, more to himself than anyone else, as if acknowledging a realization that had quietly settled into place, and Marcus watched without pressing, without adding anything further. his calm presence filling the silence more effectively than words, and one of the men behind the leader shifted his hands into his pockets, his posture less guarded now, while another turned slightly sideways, no longer forming a solid line, and the group began to loosen naturally, not in retreat, but in recognition, and the distant siren continued to approach, now clearly audible though still a few blocks away, and the leader finally spoke, his voice lower than before. "Long night." "Huh," he said, not quite a question, and Marcus gave a faint nod. "It has been," he replied quietly, and Malik glanced briefly toward the street, then back to the group, his expression steady, and the leader gave a short breath that almost sounded like a quiet laugh, though it carried no mockery now, only acknowledgement, and he stepped back one pace, creating a little more space in the alley, and the movement was small but significant, and the men behind him followed without being told, shifting naturally, the circle dissolving into scattered positions, and Marcus noticed the change in posture. The lowered shoulders, the softened expressions, and the tension that had filled the alley earlier faded into something calmer, something human, and the breeze moved through again, rattling the loose wire along the fence, and Malik adjusted his stance slightly, the gravel crunching softly, and the leader glanced once more at Marcus and Malik, his eyes no longer measuring, but thoughtful, and he nodded once. "You two have a good night," he said quietly, and Marcus returned the nod, calm and respectful, and Malik mirrored the gesture, and the group began to drift aside, creating a clear path toward the street, and the distant siren continued its slow approach, its sound now blending into the city's quiet rhythm, and Marcus and Malik stepped forward together, their footsteps steady, unhurried, passing through the space that had once felt closed, and the flickering light buzzed softly overhead as they moved toward the alley exit. The night air cooler now, the tension replaced by a quiet understanding that lingered in the silence behind them. Marcus and Malik stepped out of the alley and onto the quiet sidewalk, their footsteps steady against the damp concrete as the distant siren finally passed 2 blocks away, its red and blue reflections briefly flickering across the storefront windows before fading into the night, and the cool air felt wider here, less confined, carrying the faint scent of rain and distant traffic, and neither brother spoke at first, the silence between them familiar and comfortable, the kind that followed. Moments that did not need explanation, and Marcus glanced up at the streetlight above the corner, its steady glow replacing the flickering uncertainty of the alley behind them, and Malik adjusted his jacket slightly, the fatigue of the long shift settling back into his shoulders now that the tension had passed, and across the street a late-night diner hummed softly, its neon sign casting a pale blue reflection across puddles along the curb, and Marcus exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cool night air, and Malik gave a faint smile, almost imperceptible, the kind that came from shared understanding rather than relief, and they began walking south along the block, their pace unhurried, the city quiet around them, and behind them the alley remained still, the group of men now scattered, their voices low and indistinct, no longer forming a wall, but simply individuals drifting back into the night. And Marcus glanced once over his shoulder, not out of concern, but habit, and saw the leader standing near the alley entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, watching them for a brief moment before turning away, and the streetlight reflected softly along the wet pavement as Marcus and Malik continued forward, their steps synchronized without effort, and somewhere above them a passing train rumbled faintly across distant tracks, the sound blending into the city's nighttime rhythm, and Malik finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Long day," he said, and Marcus nodded. "Long day," he replied, and the brief exchange settled into silence again, and they passed the diner window where a lone waitress wiped down the counter, the warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk for a moment before they moved beyond it, and the air cooled slightly as they reached the next intersection, the pedestrian signal blinking quietly, and Marcus pressed the button, the soft click barely audible, and they waited side by side, the crosswalk light changing from red to white, and the empty street stretched ahead, calm and open, and as they crossed, the city seemed to breathe again, the quiet tension of the night replaced by steady calm, and the flickering memory of the alley faded behind them, leaving only the rhythm of their footsteps and the soft glow of streetlights guiding them forward. And neither brother looked back again, their silhouettes moving down the block until the quiet night folded around them, the sound of their footsteps fading into the stillness of the sleeping city.